To gain a critical perspective in communication, we must first understand what communication is. And to understand the nature of communication or the communication process, we need to study its history. We need to study how communication evolves from one period to another. And that is why in this lecture video, we will discuss these following topics. The first one is orality and literacy. Next one is traditional media, mass media, and new media. And finally, we will discuss the concept of media convergence and the blurring of genres. So these topics are very important because we would be able to understand how people communicated back then and how we communicate now. And because we are exploring and also understanding the way or the communication practices and even the tools of communication from different periods, we would be able to see and appreciate uh, the potential of communication and even the power of communication and how communication affects our lives, our culture, and our society. So I will explain this in the history in a much simpler way. Actually, I will not be specific in telling the history of communication, like mentioning the dates, mentioning the key people and the organizations, but instead, I will elaborate on the dialogic relationship of, these topics, on the dialogic relationship of orality and literacy, the dialogic relationship of traditional media and new media, and how these two modes of communication, orality and literacy, and how the, these periods of communication from media from the traditional period and media in today's world, I will discuss uh, how these were converged in our society today, and how these are blurred in today's world. So we take note here that these things are, or these modes of communication, these periods of communication, these types of media are equally important and significant in shaping our culture and society. So uh, uh, we will not, as we will not say that one type of media is greater or better than the other, or orality is better than literacy, or vice versa. So in the process of studying communication, or in the process of studying the evolution of communication in this case, we will be able to discover that orality actually informs literacy and vice versa, and that new media emerged from traditional media, which facilitates the convergence of traditional and new media, and it results in the blurring of genres. So here we will acknowledge uh, both both modes of communication. We will acknowledge both types of media, uh, that they are significant, that they contribute to one another, and without one, the other won't even thrive, and without one, we won't be able to consider it as communication in today's world. So let's try to look at this point. Let's try to elaborate at this by looking at orality and literacy. So here we would try to ask, why is orality and literacy important? So here Walter Ong said that human society first formed itself with the aid of oral speech, becoming literate very late in its history, and at first only in certain groups. Homo sapiens has been in existence in between 30,000 and 50,000 years, and the earliest script dates from only 6,000 years ago, which relatively is very young compared when we try to look at the history uh, of humans. or the history of the human people, here we would see that we actually did not start communicating through writing. We actually started communicating through our bodies and primarily to our voice. So, in other words, humans started to communicate orally first, and then later on, we develop written communication as we try to communicate. So, without orality, we won't be able to have written communication. So, we need to take note here that uh, when we started to communicate. We made utterances. We spoke. We tried to use our voice to communicate, and which is what we're also doing today. We also use our voice to communicate, to express our thoughts, and then later on, we would we were able to discover writing. We were able to discover different technologies in order for us to write, in order for us to draw. So we started communicating through our bodies first. We may use signs, we may use body gestures, we may use non-verbal codes first, and then later on we use our voice, we use verbal codes in order to communicate, and then because of that we were able to create connections with other people. And because we were able to create connections, we were able to build a community and a society. And because of that, uh, we were able to develop language. We were able to develop culture, and because of these things, we were able to facilitate writing or written communication. So through oral and written communication, we are able to express our thoughts, create shared meanings, and even interpret meanings from our interactions. So here, we will just summarize what I said earlier. So orality and literacy is very important because here we can see how communication evolved from time to time. We started with using our bodies, using nonverbal codes, and then we were able to make utterances. And because of that, we were able to do speech. And that is what we call oral communication. And later on, we were able to use our surroundings uh, as an extension of communication. And because of that, we were able to use the materials, we were able to use the tools that we have in our surroundings. In the people back then, were able to use ink or from ink from plants, ink from animal blood, or ink from or ink from the ink from different sources, so that they were able to do visual communication. And an example of these are cave drawings or cave paintings. Here they try to communicate with other people or with people who are visiting that place. Some the plants that are edible, the animals that they need to avoid, what is happening around that area. So they were able to communicate using cave paintings, using visual communication. But then they are also using oral communication. But then they are already trying to shift to visual communication because there are also limitations when it comes to oral communication in that time. You need to go exactly to that person. You need to go exactly to that area or community in order to hear stories from them, in order to gain information, because that's the only thing that they can do to disseminate, to to spread their knowledge, to spread their culture or their ideas. And because of that, they when they discovered visual communication, they realized that, oh, it is we can actually share information, we can actually share ideas or express our thoughts without being there. So they would be able to make communication tangible. And now, uh, when they discovered technologies, when they discovered the use of pen and paper or ink and paper, they were able uh, to develop written communication, and and it evolves in it and it evolves from time to time. So before they were able to produce paper, they were able to write, and they were able to make documents, books, and other written stuff. And because of that, they were able to develop themselves. They were able to create themselves a society, and to to improve to improve their technologies. And because of that, they were able to develop new technologies and utilize these technologies to communicate with and connect with other people. And we started from pen and paper, but now we evolved into having a printing press, and then later on having radio, TV, and even the internet. So what we have here today actually started from oral communication, from the desire to communicate, from the desire to connect. And then later on, when we discover technologies, as we continue to communicate, we were able to develop ourselves, to develop our intellect, and later on, we were able to use it for communication purposes again. And here, before we just use oral communication and then written communication and then visual communication, but now we can use all three of them. We can actually use or, orality and then literacy at the same time because of today's technology, because of the convergence that is happening due technological advancements. So I think some of you would think that there is an assumption between traditional versus modern, or old versus new, or written over oral communication, or digital media being better than traditional media. But our goal here in this lecture is to not say that one is better than the other, like what I said earlier. The goal here is not to see which era or mode is better, but to appreciate how useful orality and literacy are in shaping culture, how important traditional media and new media in shaping our culture and society. And we can see here through convergence. Convergence will not happen if we only just focus on written communication alone or in literacy alone. Convergence wouldn't happen if we will just focus on orality alone. Actually, we wouldn't exist, or we wouldn't be able to thrive and even to grow as a society, as uh, as humans, or having these kinds of technologies without the use of orality or even literacy, or doing both. And because of that, we can see the beauty of communication, that different tools, different modes of communication are always converging, are always are always designed to converge, to uh, to use both ways, to use different technologies, to use different kinds or types of media. So here we would be able to appreciate how useful both orality and literacy are in shaping our culture, our society, and even ourselves. And here, we can also see that media plays an important role in the permanence and mobility of culture among individuals, groups, and communities. And these types of media actually reflects our culture, and this actually reflects how our culture thrives, how our culture grows, how our society develops because of different tools of communication. So, so here we can see that without media, without communication, without these different practices, our culture will not be able to develop. Our culture will just remain stagnant. And if our culture remains stagnant or not or if our culture does not grow, and that means we wouldn't be able to survive, or we wouldn't be able to also grow as a self and also as a community. We will remain primitive uh, without without communication or without media. So here we can see that culture and language actually aid us in classifying our experience. So like what I said earlier, culture cannot exist in the absence of communication, because here we need to take note that that communication is language, and without language we wouldn't be able to connect with one another. Wouldn't be able to socialize with one another, and that is difficult for us because uh, we are actually social animals. We need each other in order to grow. We need each other in order to survive in this world, especially in today's world. So we actually cannot live alone. We are actually designed to interact with other people, to interact with nature. And for us to interact, we need communication and we need media. And because of that, we were able to develop language so that we would be able to understand each other effectively, so that we would be able to express our thoughts effectively and more conveniently than before. And as and because of that, we were able to create a community, and not just to create a community. Communication can actually exert our power relations. So, as such, power can shift from those who can share their stories to a larger group through the use of mass media technologies, whether traditional or new. So here we are not just using communication to express our thoughts, to create meanings or make sense of meanings, but we are also using communication to express or um, to share our lived experiences. And because we can share our lived experiences, we can also share uh, or identify the power relations. So, in other words, our stories help define our culture and or define our society or define ourselves. But the goal for the civilized society is to use communication to create power and to exert power in shaping our society into a civilized one, into a more informed, more rational society. And to do that, we need to shape culture professionally and ethically through communication. So here we notice that in today's world, this information is very rampant. This information is very prevalent in today's society. And because of that, we are not just us students, but all of us should know or should be able, should have a responsibility to have a professional and ethical communication. And because uh, because if we continue uh, to tolerate this information, if we continue to have an unprofessional sharing of information or unethical sharing of information, we wouldn't be able to discern what is true. We wouldn't be able to see what is right, or we wouldn't be able to see what is real or what is really happening in today's world. And if we do not if we do not if we were not able to see the truth, if we were not be able to see the reality through communication practices through media, we wouldn't be able to have a rational or a civilized society or culture. We wouldn't be able to have a uninformed culture. And if we continue to have an uninformed culture or an uninformed society, our society will self-destruct. Our society or our community will be destroyed easily. We will become more vulnerable. We will become more fragile, and we wouldn't be able to survive in today's world. And to do that, we always need to have this kind we need to have this kind of responsibility that we need to have a professional and ethical communication. And what do I mean when I say professional and ethical communication? Here we need to realize that communication always has a process to follow. It always has a procedure or even a standard to follow. And without a standard, we are we have the right to share our thoughts. We have the right to share our experiences. We always have that right, but we also need to be responsible so that people would understand us effectively, so that we would be able to communicate and interact effectively, and at the same time, uh, we would be able to create information that is true, information that is not detached from reality, and at the same time, uh, we would be able to discern what is true and what is right. So, so what do I mean when we actually say traditional media and new media? So here we see that actually we look at the picture here or the image here. Uh, the traditional media composed of print media such as newspapers, posters, and even printed ads. But it also includes radio, TV, film, and even audio recording. But in new media, we can see that there is what we see the use of the new technology, which is the internet, which is computers or smartphones, or even using social media sites. So here here in new media, we can see that we primarily use internet for communication, and in the internet we can use social media sites. We can do streaming. So before we if we want to watch a film, or if we want to watch a video, or if we want to consume content, we will we need a television, we need to use radio, we need to go outside or and buy newspapers. But now everything can be accessed. News can be accessed in our smartphones. We can watch films, we can watch TV, we can watch TV shows in our tablets and our computers. And that is how we use new media compared to traditional media. So the similarity here is that when we is that we use the same content, but then it takes on different forms. It takes on different accessibilities. So Stanley Baran said that we are that as we are encouraged by the internet, digitization, and mobility, new producers are finding new ways to deliver new content to new audiences. So, what does he mean in this statement? What he means here is that communication always evolves as we continue to have the desire to need something. So as long as we desire to grow, as long as we desire to connect, and as long as we desire to interact with one another, we are able to discover new technologies. We are able to discover new forms of accessibility, of consuming content, of sharing information, and sharing our lived experiences. And because of that, there is an experimentation of producing content, and we use that in different types of media. So here, before we try to listen to music from our iPod or from our MP3 players, or even before that we started from Walkman to holding a radio. But now we can listen to music through smartphones, through without using another device to listen or to stream to music. When we try to watch movies, we go before to cinemas. But until today, we also use cinemas. But now we have the access to just use our phones or even our tablets or even our laptops or computers to watch movies, to stream movies in the comfort of our home or in our own convenience. And when we try to get information and news before, we go uh, to news tellers. So news tellers are those who actually report events, who actually witness events, and go to see to municipalities, to go to the plazas, and then uh, to narrate their stories, to narrate the news. But and then later on, we were able to use newspapers, to use printed media to get information, to get news. But now we can just use our smartphones to read news. We can just scroll down in our social media sites to check and read news. We can actually go to Twitter and read what's happening at the same time, or what's happening live, or what's happening right now or at that moment. And uh, we are just crawling down on our laptops or really going to different uh, news websites to read news, to gather information or what we need. So here we also notice that there is what we call media multitasking, where before we only use one form of communication. We only use one form of uh, we only use one type of media. But now we can use media, we can use different types of media, we can use different tools of communication at the same time. So we can actually listen to our class while using your phone. You can actually attend a synchronous class with while watching a TV with your family. So here, you are doing media multitasking, and that is because of the accessibility of technology. Because we can use different types of technology at the same time. We can actually do multitasking at the same time. Unlike before, that because technology is limited, we won't be able to use one type of media and the other at the same time. So we notice that the difference between generations. Back then, our parents only just use radio, and then later on, when they live in the age of television, they just use television, and at the same time they use both. But now, because of the emergence of the internet and the emergence of digital media, we can now use all of them at the same time. So, what actually are the changes that is happening, or that has happened in communication and media? Stanley Baran mentioned uh, five changes in the media and communication world today. The first one is the concentration of ownership and conglomeration, and it actually goes hand in hand with globalization and hyper commercialism. So here we notice that media and communication is becoming more oriented towards capitalism, towards globalization. And because of that, we see that content is driven by profit. Producing content goes hand in hand with profit. So whatever we see, whatever content or information that we see in media today, whether in traditional media, in printed media, or even in digital media or in new media, they exist because of profit. They exist because someone paid for it, or someone invested on it to produce it. So, or even someone produced the technology in order to produce information, to produce content. And because of that, they were able to not just produce content in their own area, but because of the phenomenon of globalization, information becomes more accessible to other people. Be- Information becomes more profitable, or the content becomes more profitable. And because of the accessibility and the availability of different types of information, it also produces different types of audience. And audience are becoming more and more fragmented. And that is why there are what we call target markets, target communities, or a target niche, where we try to curate content or even to design content for that type of audience only. And because of that, we try to utilize the convergence of media. We try to utilize different types of media in producing information, in sharing our lived experiences. But the problem here is that media owners are becoming fewer before and before any there are a lot of people who owns media, uh, who owns different types of media, but now because of but now because of conglomeration, networks are becoming more networks are becoming merged, and at the same time ownership are also becoming more concentrated, even even if we live in a democratic society. So the question here that we try to ask is media being more democratic? So here we need to ask this question every time we try to consume different types of content. So it doesn't mean that the content we see here are an expression of free speech, or or is a reflection of free uh, free press. It doesn't mean that the more that we produce content, the more that we share information. It doesn't mean that the the press in this area, or the communication and media in this area is considered as free, or as considered as democratic. So before we try to look on that. We try to look on quantity to determine if the press if there is press freedom, or if the press is democratic. But now we need to, because of the prevalence of these information networks, uh, we need to take a shift in focusing press freedom, or focusing the democracy of communication by looking at the quality of the content produced. Is the content produced follows a procedure? Is the content produced follows a certain standard of producing and sharing information? Is it systematic when it comes to producing this type of content? Is the content Does the content have quality? So here we wouldn't look at quantity anymore, because even this information, even fake news, even lies, spread throughout different types of media, are now utilizing quantity over quality. So people would see that, oh, I always see this information often. I always see this kind of information every time when I go to different types of media or different types of technology. And because of that, I would assume that this is true. But we need to try to shift from that point of view to this kind of perspective, that we need to see if this kind of content follows a certain procedure, if this content follows a certain system, or follows a certain standard. So we need to go back to looking at communication professionally, and at the same time ethically. So what do I mean when I say media convergence? So media convergence basically is the coming together of telecommunications, computing, and broadcasting into a single digital bitstream, such as multimedia content access to mobile digital systems. So we try to compare media convergence from traditional media, and then to new media. So in traditional media, a convergence is limited only to having the same message content. So before, when I try to express or when I try to share information, I can just share it in newspapers and then later on share it also that kind of that same content in radio, so in audio form and even in moving picture form or in video. But in new media, it is we were able to merge the text, audio, and video into one single content, into one accessible content. And in that way, it blurs the conventional boundaries between different types of media and even traditional media and in digital or in new media. So here, when we try to when we try to access content, we can now access content uh, as a video, as text, and as an audio file at the same time. So we and in just one uh, and in just one tool or in just one mode or of communication or media. So, Mikhail Bakhtin actually said that past cultural works, for example, literature, are continually informed by the present versions of the same cultural work and vice versa, and not as a matter of influence, but as a continuous dialogue that oscillates both ways. So, what does he mean by this? So, we started with orality, and then later on with visual communication, and then later on with written communication, and using different types of media to communicate. And because and we can see here that uh, orality informs literacy. Literacy informs media, traditional media. Traditional media informs new media. And here there is a dialogic relationship among media in their convergent form. So the beauty of media here, or the beauty of communication here, is that it always converges. It always merges with one mode and one period to another. So the communication that we use today is actually a combination of orality, literacy, visual communication, and traditional media, and even new media or digital media. So media convergence is actually possible because of this dialogic relationship, because of this dialogic nature that we can use we can use communication before, and we can use communication now at the same time. And the communication tools and different types of media, although they are different in nature, they are different in terms of purpose or in terms of technology, we can still use them. We can they can still they are still able to work together and able to create new forms of meaning and even to create new technologies. So the good thing here is that because of media convergence, because of this flexibility of communication, information is now becoming more and more accessible. We have to appreciate back then that uh, we have to appreciate the fact that back then, when we try to look for knowledge, when we try to look for information, we need to go to another community. We need to go to that same person. But now we can actually use the internet to connect with other people. We can actually use the internet to look at their works without actually going to them or talking to them. And because of that, the content or the information that is produced is becoming much and much easier through with through our convenience, through our taste, and through different technologies. So here, connection is actually easier, and the content or the message produced is more flexible, and there is actually more room for experimentation in content creation and even in consumption. However, uh, even though there are good things that is happening in media convergence and even in the communication world today, this information is also rampant, and that audience are becoming less and less critical because of the convenience of communication. And because of this, we are actually taking communication for granted when we know that communication has the potential to exert our power relations, to exert uh, to not just express our lived experiences or sentiments or our expressions or our thoughts, but then we were we are also taking for granted that communication actually shapes society. And if these information networks continue to be tolerated, if this information continues to be tolerated in this society and in this culture, if these information networks cannot be controlled in our society, we wouldn't we will be less and less informed of what is real, what is true. And we are actually creating more fantasies than realities, and we are becoming less and less detached from what is really happening in the real world. And because of that, we are creating an irrational society. We are creating a less critical society, or we are actually creating a dumb. We are actually uh, shaping ourselves to be dumb people or to be idiots. And that is why media literacy is important, because knowing the process of communication and at the same time having the responsibility of creating a professional and ethical communication uh, enables us to become more informed, critical, and at the same time responsible in using and producing information. So, so to end, we realize that communication is not just oral form or just written form or just using technology. Communication and media is actually those three: orality, literacy, and even media, traditional media, and even new media or digital media. And because of that, we always have uh, these four communication skills. Uh, Speaking, listening, writing, and reading. And and be, and because media continues to evolve, we are also incorporating collaborating uh, as a communication skill. And because of these communication skills, we need to develop, we also keep in mind that we are also practicing and at the same time enhancing the skills towards a more professional and more ethical communication. And we also realized that communication thrives, or our society thrives, because of our needs. And the way we communicate is reflected on our needs, on our desire to grow and to develop, not just as a person, but also as a community or a society. So the technology that we use today, the way we communicate today, reflects our needs, our desires as a self, and also as a community. So also in this module, we trace the evolution of communication from oral to written form and the development of media from traditional to new and convergent media. So we also learned about oral storytelling as an early form of communication. And as technology advanced, new tools of inscription and dissemination and production were also introduced, which also increased our influence of our stories from our immediate communities to larger societies and cultures with far-reaching effects. So here we need to realize that we are not actual that communication is not just a reflection of our needs, but it is also a reflection of our power. Because whoever wields control over media or communication tools has the power to dominate and to raise ethical issues, or to, in the practice of communication, or to challenge even the process, even the current process, even the current standards that we have today. So here to uh, we need to highlight the importance of having a professional and ethical communication, because whoever, if we have the control over media, if we have the control over the communication tools that we use, we were able to dictate, and at the same time to say um, what is right, what is real, what is true, what is what is really happening. So here, if those who control media are unprofessional and unethical, these information networks will continue to grow, will continue to grow larger, and at the same time will create fantasies, will create detached realities, and will make the population or our society less and less critical and informed and rational. So, however, in the advent of digital media through the introduction of the internet has made it possible for ordinary individuals to produce and share their own stories, and thus creating counter cultures and altering to some extent the power relations in communication and media practice and in society as a whole. So here we have actually the potential to change society through communication. We actually have the power to challenge the communication and media practice, and uh, to challenge the society today. And because of that, communication practice today is multifaceted and complex, and we are actually called upon to develop a more critical understanding of the role of communication in addressing various challenges confronting society and in building a better world for all.